Welcome to Shows What You Know, your television podcast where we take all of your favorite shows, past, present, and even in the future, and we break them down for you. I am Jim Scampoli.
I am Jacob Burrows, and
Oh,
breaking down
no.
does sound like something negative when you think about it, but actually, we're just looking at all the components, looking at what makes it great, and this week we're talking about a show that's made a lot of great things, made people great. It's Spaced from Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg and Jessica Hines, formerly Stevenson, and I'm excited to talk about it. What about you, Jim?
Yes, it's very much like visiting an old friend. It's been far too long since I've rewatched Space. So we should say that the reason why we're discussing Space, besides the fact that we're big fans of the show and Ben about the show, we ain't noobs here,
Yeah.
is we did get a review on, what was it, Stitcher or iTunes?
This one was on Stitcher, but the deal is that if you leave a review on iTunes and you tell us what show you'd like us to discuss, we're going to do an episode on it. Not every show is going to give you an offer like that. What a great incentive to go and leave a review immediately, because we're willing to talk about whatever trash you like or even dislike if you just want to hear us shit on it. Either way, this time it was Avalanche who gave us a choice of Spaced, Black Books, or Red Dwarf, and those are shows that are close to my heart, close to my formative development years of watching UK sitcoms on Swedish television, which is how I formed a lot of my sense of, filmmaking identity, comedy identity, even. And we picked Spaced because everyone loves Spaced. It's Edgar Wright, it's Simon Pegg, Jessica Hines / Stevenson, who is unfortunately not doing as much stuff now as the other two, but they're all great, and they made something that's influenced a lot of people. What's your first input to it, Jim? What's your first entry into this space?
Well, like I said, it really did feel like visiting an old friend. I didn't discover the show until, I watched it before I saw Shaun of the Dead, but I remember seeing a trailer for a movie called Shaun of the Dead, and I was like, that looks fucking great. That's cool. And I started looking up the people behind it, and I saw that they had this little British sitcom titled Spaced that I had to download illegally because I was in the States. So it was probably around like 2003, late 2003, early 2004, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I was hooked. I was hooked immediately. It's a great show. I mean, actually, are we going to even... Is there any type of spoiler type thing that we're worried about here on like a 17-year-old?
Well, to be clear, it is. We are discussing the first season, so if you're worried about the series finale, or the first series, I should say, since it's a UK show, but if you're worried about knowing exactly how it ends, don't be worried about that. First of all, and second of all, we're mainly discussing the first season, even though, of course, we're going to be going into just our overall feelings on it. No, there's no real spoilers. The plot of the show is that there's two friends who decide to move in together and pretend to be... It sounds so fucking stupid, but...
it really does. It's so funny.
Yeah, there's two friends that they have to pretend to be a couple to get this flat, which is English for apartment. They have to move into this flat and pretend to be a couple to get to rent it because the landlady wants a professional couple. However, everything I just said is so unimportant that you can't even imagine it. It never becomes a thing. It's never central to the story. And it's honestly, I think, just partly something they just said to the network. Like, yeah, that's what the story is, but the characters even forget that that's the plot they're in. It's like never brought up, and even, this is a slight spoiler, but I think in season 2 it's kind of like they accidentally mention it to the landlady, and her feelings are hurt because they've lied to her a little bit, but it's like not important. The whole premise is not important. What's important is that it's Simon Pegg, Jessica Stevenson, and Edgar Wright doing fantastic comedy together.
Yes, I think one of the best running bits on the show is how they constantly forget the premise of the show. And it is one of those, like, if you ever described it just based on premise alone to someone, all they would do is roll their eyes like, okay, the wacky adventures of two people that are friends that kind of, it starts a budding will they, won't they, but they have to pretend to be a couple to get their amazing apartment. And most people be like, all right, what the hell are you talking about? That sounds awful.
Yeah.
And I was going to even ask, I guess it does seem like it could have been something that was just pitched for a log line just to have a small like sentence to sell a show on, or if that was always their kind of idea from the beginning, is to deconstruct a sitcom in its premise. I mean, it's hard to say. I'm sure it's maybe a little bit of both, because
Yeah.
even over in Britain, I have to imagine you need some sort of pitch. You need a hook. You need
Yeah.
something to tell those studio execs to have them hand over the money so you
Yeah.
can make a show.
Although it's very typical of that type of time, like when you hear them talk in like behind the scenes stuff, it seems pretty typical that the people behind or the executives were kind of just going along and saying, yeah, yeah, sure, do whatever. I don't know what it was in like the late 90s or around that time. It's also similar to what you hear about The Office when they talk about how it was made, and they just kind of had these ideas. And when they're talking about it years later, they're all saying, no, that would never happen now. That would never happen. But anyway, they just kind of threw some money at it, and we kind of got to do whatever we wanted. And what they wanted to do was obviously not based on the log line. It was something they talk about a lot in behind the scenes stuff, that it's rather based on just being annoyed at the state of sitcoms at the time, that it doesn't really reflect what it's life what it's like in life as a 20 something. And I don't know, I guess that leads into my next question. Do you see yourself, do you recognize yourself in Spaced? Because I certainly do, and I feel like it doesn't matter like what country you're in, it sort of reflects this experience of being 20 something, living on your own, maybe for the first few years trying to figure shit out.
Yes, absolutely. And kind of very similar, like you mentioned, The Office, because with both of those shows, there's a lot of little like references that I don't understand, whether it be a TV show or some pop culture person that I don't get what they are.
Yeah,
But
get
it's
used
not.
to it. That's me for every fucking US show ever. I learn about your pop culture through watching The Simpsons parodying it, that and South Park. That's how I figure out what's going on in the US.
Yeah, so there's a lot of that, but like since the shows don't live and die on that, like those are just kind of a few of the smaller jokes. It's mostly, yeah, just universal themes, making friends, going through breakups, living on your own. And the biggest thing, I can't remember the last time I've watched Spaced, but it's got to be at least 5 years, probably longer. And the biggest thing that jumps out to me about this show is that, I mean, number one, I forgot how long ago it was made, because it was 1999 when this
Yeah.
debuted. Like, I think this debuted before the Phantom Menace, so that's why like there's only goofs on the Phantom Menace in series 2, I should say,
Yeah.
not season 2.
Yeah.
So for as long ago that it was made, and there's only small things like when they take a cassette tape and play a cassette tape, everything else is very timeless and it
Hmm.
doesn't feel dated, and especially because they're clearly ahead of the curve as far as using pop culture and sci-fi and genre,
Oh,
where
yeah.
everything does that now. So
Yeah.
it still plays so nice and fits amongst everything else. And plus, since everything else does it badly and they do it
Yeah.
really well,
Yeah.
I was really surprised about that.
I feel like it has a huge legacy, as you were saying, even if like it's kind of a cult show, so a lot of people have watched it, but it's mostly people who like are into making film and TV, I feel, are the type of people who would like say, "Oh, you got to watch Spaced." Like not everyone has seen it, but I think a lot of people who make stuff has seen it, and that's partially been an influence along with of course just references and pop culture in general seeping more into our entertainment. But for example, just look at Community. That's probably the most straight up evolution of Space that we have. It like
Mm.
that is the US version as far as I'm concerned, made a fair bit later, where I mean Space even has a paintball episode fucking 15 years before or something that was a thing in Community. And I mean just looking at other shows started during that time, it's not the same. Like people weren't making this type of thing then. And I don't know if that's like striking gold or whatever, but they were ahead of the time, putting in a lot of references. Because when I say someone puts in a lot of references, I think of Ernest Cline. I think
Mm.
of Ready Player One and like Big Bang Theory. I'm sure has a lot of references, and that's not quite what we mean. What? How do you say? How would you say like they do it better than everyone else?
Well, it's because it kind of reminded me that references don't equal bad.
Yeah.
Because within the past, however many years of today's pop culture, whether it be just even on your social media with someone doing a meme or like a reference, and then like you mentioned, Ernest Cline or Big Bang Theory, or even like a lot of modern day comedies. It's this more weird, direct, obvious, like in your face thing. Whereas with Spaced, like it's there, but I mean, first and foremost, it usually serves the characters,
Hmm.
or it's like a really good joke. So it just works a lot better. And I mean, maybe it's because you can feel the love more, where it's not like,
Yeah.
hey, let's do this reference. It's more like, oh, we love this thing. We should have a nice call out for it.
Yeah.
And one quick footnote back to like the how long ago this show was. Like if you think about it, they were making it, and it was like Buffy was on season 2, like when
Yeah.
they were making this show,
Yeah. I
which
think.
is because even like the second series has like a quick Buffy reference, and this one doesn't. But it's so bizarre because it doesn't feel like that.
Well, I was looking up. I think it's got to be season 3 because Angel also started in '99, I believe.
Oh, well, I just mean more like when they were making it and maybe
Oh yeah.
shooting it, because if it
Oh, that's true.
premiered in like 99. But yeah, same thing. Like season 2, season 3, like as
Hmm.
Buffy was just kind of hitting its like pop culture peak, and like everyone was talking about it. But it's just bizarre to think it's like around that same time.
Yeah, and it's almost like also with the references, it's not like they just say like this you're like Darth Vader. Like like it's not all in like the dialogue. If it is, it's usually done pretty well, but it's also just got this visual touch. That's all. I mean, yeah, it's all Edgar Wright. I titled this Edgar Wright's Film School because, from what he himself has said, this was basically him workshopping and doing a lot of the stuff that he's later become famous for doing in like how to put together something that's like visually comedic and has a unique style. And of course, a lot of that is putting in visual hints and references and just things that are funny just from how you put the camera and move it, which just people don't do. I'm sure you've seen this video, and a lot of the people listening have seen this How to Do Visual Comedy, Edgar Wright, which is a video essay by Every Frame a Painting, where he goes through all the different things that Edgar Wright does that a lot of comedy like directors just don't do, because a lot of comedy these days is just like improv, or and I love improv, but just putting the camera down and then like have them say funny stuff back and forth. And Edgar Wright actually makes something that's visually funny, and this is him trying out a lot of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And even besides that, just like going back in time for when they were making the show and taking taking not just television, but taking a television sitcom and making it cinematic.
Yeah.
Was probably, not that they invented it, but it was pretty well unheard of. And of course, these days with peak TV, TV is cinema, so it's not as weird to think that you're making like a movie.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's and you totally see it's so interesting to see all of that with a young Edgar Wright, and then seeing his movies now, and you're like, oh yeah, this is almost even a nod on this, and you could see where he was working on this back then, and now he's doing this. So I think Film School like completely nails it
Yeah.
as far as like building as a filmmaker. One thing I do have to say though, for me, there's never that same greatness between either one, whether it be Simon Pegg or Edgar Wright. They never achieve that same greatness on their own that they do when they're together. And
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's just my personal opinion. I know a lot of people like I'm not saying neither of them do bad stuff. I mean, Simon Pegg does some bad stuff. But Edgar Wright, like Scott Pilgrim and Baby Driver aren't bad movies, obviously. They're decent, but to me, they don't touch any of the movies he's made with Edgar Wright, or even to an extent Spaced.
Right. Or yeah, any of the movies he's made with Simon Pegg. But yeah, I get
I'm
what
sorry,
you're
yeah,
saying.
yeah, you got me.
Yeah. I think because like when they were making Spaced, it was such a perfect marriage of their different identities, where Simon Pegg was kind of bringing the nerdy, geeky stuff into the equation in the writing. Jessica Hines or Stevenson was also she was more bringing the pop culture, as far as I understand it, which is like not to be frowned upon either. But as far as what's going on in culture right now, geek culture is pop culture, more or less, and there he had all that stuff, but he didn't, like, Simon Pegg had all that stuff in the writing, but he didn't really, I think, know how to bring it to life. And then Simon Pegg, sorry, Edgar Wright, I'm mixing them up too, but Edgar Wright, of course, came in with all of his approach. I mean, this is the reason I'm sure that they've later been writing stuff together, like Hot Fuzz. I guess Shaun of the Dead, I don't really recall if they wrote that together or not, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they did. I actually watched Shaun of the Dead after I finished this season
Yeah.
of Space because I just had a hankering.
Yeah. So yeah, I was just saying that they just came together, the visual side, the writing side, and I think that's what makes it a perfect double whammy where like the different skills coming at it from different directions, making something great together. And maybe Edgar Wright goes off and explores his visual stuff somewhere else, and Simon Pegg explores his writing somewhere else. But though I do really love Scott Pilgrim, so I shouldn't say anything too much. But I do see your point that together they make something very special.
Yeah, and I mean, not to like make this about like Scott Pilgrim or whatever, but I mean, I like it too, and I get why you'd like it. It's just, I feel like Edgar Wright's stuff without Simon Pegg is a lot of flash, and it doesn't have this, it's missing some of the heart
Yeah.
that you get when they're both together. And then to Simon Pegg's discredit, like he acts and he pops up in some bad movies, so that stinks.
But not a lot of movies that he writes.
Very true.
I think he's just cashing in, or well, I mean, I'm sure he's having fun too. But this is clearly like these are passion projects, the central ones that we're talking about, that they really put their heart into. And as far as what you were saying about like film, making something that feels like film on TV, I think that also ties into a lot of creators watching this show and watching them, because this is such an inspiring TV show just as far as like how it looks and feels, because most TV shows, even more than movies, just lack this filmic language that they're using. You and me have both made short films of different types, and we've both, I'm sure, put a lot of thought into like what shots should be where and stuff like that. But just watching this makes you think, oh shit, I should have put even more thought into where I was putting the camera. I should have like storyboarded this. I could have done so much more interesting stuff, because we just get used to watching stuff that's like shot, reverse shot, like kind of this show we're doing right here. We're talking back and forth.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's so many possibilities, and there's such a language of cinema to be used that is used on this small, low budget TV show made in the 90s for a small UK channel. And it's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy. I guess that concludes my point.
Yeah, I agree. And what's great about it is that it's not like there's clearly a lot of skill and technique with the filmmaking, but it serves because the show's clearly about like, you know, taking the mundane and elevating it, like just in the way, you know, Tim or Daisy would look at their regular lives because they're, you know, expecting greatness that was promised to them by the pop culture they absorb. So it all works. It's not just this like, you know, here's remember The Shining, guys? Remember The Shining? No, it works and it fits and it's funny, and a lot of things. I mean, it's the same type of theme you see through, like, at least the Cornetto trilogy, like with Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz and World's End. It's similar, like, you know, having these like the day-to-day mundane people in extraordinary situations. And it's kind of like my favorite. It's like my favorite thing. It seems like it'd be easy to do, but a lot of other, you know, shows or films try it. And like you mentioned, Community is really good with that. And even to an extent, it's not quite the same, but whereas like it could almost come off as Family Guy references. Yeah. It's better than that. And it reminded me a little bit rewatching of like Scrubs, where Scrubs would have cutaways and references, but they worked better. And it's similar to like what I saw with Spaced.
Yeah. Yeah, they do cut away also to their, especially cutting away to their imaginations of how things are gonna go or how things have been in the past, and it's definitely like heightened to the 10th degree, making something super dramatic or constantly imagining themselves doing cool stuff, and then afterwards we see them doing like failing miserably. It's very Scrubs, and yeah, and as far as you were saying with the trilogy and stuff, and about the mundane mixing, it's kind of true that parts of Spaced are kind of boring because they're sort of meant to be. There's so much of that show that's just them hanging out in the flat, not knowing what to do, just, oh, I should be writing, I should be doing this, and then like not happening. And then all of a sudden it's a heist movie or something because of how the characters are. And then the film style also goes into a heist movie. Like I'm thinking of the episode where the dog is kidnapped, and a lot of that episode, like nothing is happening, and then they're just fighting, and then all of a sudden they're like doing a heist to get this dog back, and it's kind of hilarious.
Yeah, no, it works great. And even like some of the smaller stuff, like it's either the first, no, yeah, it's in the first episode. Even some of the smaller stuff when it's just them hanging out in their apartment and then with their neighbor from downstairs and their new landlady, and they're just up late talking, drinking and smoking. It's kind of like, I want to be there. I want to hang out with these people, even in this like boring moment, because it's and that's just in the first episode, and you're already like, I want to hang out with these people. So it works really well.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I think the second episode is like all about them having a party that's kind of a failure. That's the whole plot of the episode. That I don't remember really how much they leave the flat in that episode, but I feel like it's just them talking back and forth and kind of being mean and annoying at each other a lot. Especially Tim, as I've noticed on this rewatch. Tim is kind of an asshole through most of this first series, and then like this dislike kind of goes away over time because Tim just acts mean. He's not actually mean, and it does show this heart that we were mentioning earlier, where like he says mean stuff about Brian and downstairs and stuff, but then suddenly they're hanging out and he's inviting him to things and caring about the other characters. And especially towards the end of the season, it feels like without you even realizing, these characters have grown on you so much because you've been living with them and hanging out with them, that I had emotional reactions to things I weren't expecting, like when Brian goes to the club. He hasn't been clubbing for like 15 years, and he goes to the club and he was so worried. He had this anxiety about knocking someone's drink over, and then he got punched years ago, and then he knocks someone's drink over and the guy just looks at him, and then he just hugs him and they keep dancing. I don't know why, but that kind of affected me emotionally, even though it was just a little goof.
Yeah, that's great. It's a great moment. I mean, it's probably my least favorite episode of this season or series one. Yeah. But yeah, I love the intro with Brian and the "Come on, Eileen," and like the epic, like him being like kind of the nerd at the party of like, I guess, bros or whatever the British equivalent of a bro would be. And yeah, getting punched and having anxiety about doing like that stuff. I loved. I guess the rest of the episode, since it's mostly just dancing.
Mm-hmm.
It's still cool. Like, again, it's still cool because I like all these people, so it's great when they're all together having fun. And I do love the bike messenger character who starts dancing to in the flats that make like a techno beat or whatever. But no, you're right. Like the Brian moment where then he thinks it's all going to happen again. He blew it again, but it's like, I guess a new generation, and everyone's on ecstasy because they're all drinking water and sweaty and kind of high. But I assume maybe on TV you can't be like, let's do ecstasy. So you just kind of assume like, oh yeah, they're all doing ecstasy clearly. And so it's like, nah, man, come here, bro. It's just a drink. I'm gonna hug you and give you a great moment. Brian is such a great character. Um, like I could be wrong. I'm just basing it off of seeing Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright's stuff post Spaced without Jessica Hines. I feel like a lot of the art stuff is her. I'm basing this off nothing, just that they never really covered it again, and like this, like the pretentiousness and the like university crowd or whatever. And I do miss some of that. And one thing about Daisy as well that I like that I forgot about this season is she's such a spaz, weirdo kind of. But I really like the way it's played out, and she's like just such a weird nerd spaz. And you're right, Tim's more of a kind of a jerk, but there is that push and pull. Like they bring it up constantly of how Daisy's using Tim's stuff to solve her, like to distract herself from her own issues.
Yeah.
But I mean, it all plays great.
Yeah, I mean, it does make sense to me that that's not your favorite episode because a lot of it is just dancing. And that's probably one of the ones that has, I guess, the least traditional plot as well. I mean, the thing with Brian's more or less the main bit there. There's like Nick Frost Mike is doing something in that episode. It's kind of, I don't know. I just watched them all, and
I think that's the one when. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what they call it, but I equate it to what would be like Boy Scouts here.
Yeah,
because he's like taking kids on a canoe, but he like brings too many stones and sinks it or something like that. Like,
yeah.
So he's really bummed about it. Yeah. And I mean, I know we're just jumping around, which is probably for the best. We're not going to go beat by beat on all the episodes, but like, how ahead of their time were they with this vulva character and the non-gender specific? But I mean, it is played for laughs. I don't feel like you'd be able to play that for laughs anymore.
Yeah.
Like, because it was always funny when Brian's like, you just wouldn't understand a relationship between two heterosexual men and one of them who's a woman or something like that. And but it like plays so true for today and like gender identity and politics.
Mm-hmm.
But like the vulva character is great, and the way they're goofing on art and like, oh, that's so postmodern expressionism. Oh, Brian. And of course that plays in with all the zombie stuff, which you clearly see, like, you know, setting a track for Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this and you haven't watched Space, just to sell you on it additionally, that is the episode where they go to an art or a play, I guess, or performance art thing for Brian's old performance buddy, and it's the worst thing anyone could ever imagine seeing. That's also kind of ties into this feeling of being 20 something and going to a lot of stuff and like looking at it like, oh, okay, this is a thing. I guess I went I mean I went to like one show where some lady had a table full of sand and she had like stones, and it was like experimental music, but she was just kind of grinding stones against sand and then super amplifying it, and it just kind of sounded like for like half an hour, and I was like, there's free drinks, so this is fine, I guess, and really recognized myself in that. But anyway, yeah, she has green face paint in this show, and Simon Pegg, Tim, has just been playing too much video games, and he just goes bananas, punches all these zombies that start appearing because we're in his mind, and he's all, I guess, drunk and tired from playing too many video games. So he beats up a lot of zombies.
And there's a moment in this episode that I quote all the time, and no one knows what I'm quoting. But it's when because Vulva does their performance. Vulva and Hoover. Hoover is her like assistant or whatever. He's just a guy with a vacuum in his ass. And he's like a real hooligan, I guess. He's a real hooligan type of British guy. I don't know how to describe him. But they do the big show, and then they all stop, and then everyone starts clapping. He goes, "Finished. It's finished." Just to be a dick. But I always say that. No one knows what I'm talking about. And that episode also has when Daisy goes out for the Flappers. Is it Flappers magazine or Flaps or something like that?
Yeah, Flaps.
Which is like a pussy, right? Yeah. And it has that like it's that nice moment where she's not quite like girl. She's not enough for the magazine. Like she kind of like doesn't know what they're talking about, and then she gives them the old girl power. And like just great moments. I mean, it's hard with the show that's great. Like all I could be is like, remember this part, remember this funny part. But that's because it's so good.
Yeah, and I mean, I enjoy talking about that stuff too. That magazine bit also feels like very, very much something that Simon Pegg couldn't have written, or Edgar Wright couldn't have brought to it. Which is why it's such a nice combination, because that also feels completely in line with everything else going on at the show, where we have these three characters in a job interview. Because the feeling of going to job interviews is also something that is very familiar to that time in my life, and seeing that total failure she has, where she can't keep up with what they're saying and just gets distracted, and they're way too cool and use way too many words that she doesn't follow, and then she just messes it all up because she's a big spaz. It's a great moment.
Yeah, and especially like you're saying, like way this show, I mean, the show clearly like captures a lot of things about being in your 20s, and because in a weird way, in your 20s is when you're, I mean, I haven't hit 40 yet, or like, you know, mid 40s or whatever, but in your 20s is like when you're weirdly most worried about getting old, because it's like you're finally realize, like, I mean, clearly there's the party episode where they throw a lame party and the younger people are throwing a cool party, so they have to go to the cool younger people party. And then even with this episode, like finding a job, because you're under this pressure of like, wait, I'm in my 20s now. I'm supposed to already, you know, have won an award for my writing, or have made a movie and done all this. Like all my heroes had it done by this time.
Yeah, speaking of which, fuck Edgar Wright for being like 20 when he was doing this.
Exactly.
I don't recall exactly, but I mean, he did just like, and I recall he was saying that like when he started working as a director for TV, everyone was kind of like, which executive is that guy blowing? Like, because he can't, it doesn't make any sense that he's getting to do all this work that he's getting to do, and getting to have his film school be a television show. Even though, I mean, I would have hired him too, because he's amazing. He probably gives great head as well. But it's just frustrating. That ties into what you were saying of like, oh, I should have already achieved so much, and that's what these characters are feeling too, about, because they're both creative people. Tim draws comics, and Daisy's supposed to be a writer, but neither of them really get anywhere in the first season, so that's a familiar feeling.
Yes, yeah, for sure. And there's all this pressure, because you don't, like, you're starting to get out of the excuse of like, oh, I got class, you know, I got class tomorrow. Because, you know, unless you're being like a doctor or something, or going for your master's, you know, once you're in your mid 20s, it's like, wait a minute, what are you doing in school? Why don't you have a job? Why aren't you so successful? Why aren't you doing the best thing you've ever done? Why aren't you setting up your legacy already? And then and then it starts creeping in, like, you know, things like parties and stuff, that it's not the same. And, you know, you're getting older, and, you know, maybe you want to just get a dog to fulfill this emptiness in your life.
Yes. Yeah. We both have dogs, so.
Yeah, that's right. I have 3 dogs, so more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the characters are all great. I mean, I can't not mention Marsha either. Like just that, I don't know, her like how she's even on another level, because she's older, and she's like, oh, you know, these young people don't want to hang out with an old lady like me, but also she kind of wants to hang out with them, because she's got the traditional teenage daughter who hates her and runs out. But of course, you know, there's still that mother-daughter relationship, and she's the old like lady hanging out, but they also like having her around to an extent. And plus just her accent, which I can't do well, but like hello Brian, like it like makes me smile every time.
Well, I'm just the waiter from upstairs. So, I think you just have to not move your mouth very much at all. It's just got to be solid, like your lips are solid, and then you just, oh, I'm sloshed really. So there's got to be something. We're gonna get drunk. This is gonna be it. Just kidding. That's not great either, to be honest. But
It's not
watch the
bad
show.
though. I enjoy it.
Thanks, thanks, thanks.
And then I mean, Dwayne Banzi, who also shows up in like Shaun of the Dead and some of the other movies, and
Oh
he's the
yeah.
voice of Darth Maul, right?
Does
Um,
Darth Maul speak? You mean in the
he has like
animated
two
one?
lines.
Uh,
No, he has like two lines where he's like, "At last, we will like reveal ourselves to the Jedi" or whatever. Um, let me look up. I know this dude's name. Why am I spaced on? Oh yeah, Peter Serafinowicz. However the fuck you say it. He's the Tick. He's the Tick now. He's the Tick in the Amazon Tick, and he's also Pete in Shaun of the Dead. But he's Dwayne Banzi
yeah.
here, and he is also. I just want to confirm it. So like in a weird way, because I'm pretty sure he would have been doing it around this time for episode 1.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
So you can
That's
only
weird.
imagine, probably at the time, Simon Pegg was probably like, "Oh man, this guy I know gets to be in a Star Wars movie.
Yeah.
Like, I can't believe it." But little did he know. He's in fucking Star Wars now. He's what's his face in Star Trek.
Yeah.
The guy blew up.
Speaking of like being ahead of their time, they were basically doing like red letter media in season 2, just shitting on episode 1 before there even was an episode 2. They were ahead of the game on that. They were like just hating it immediately because they were obviously aware more of the coming backlash, because when I was watching the prequels, I didn't know what was going on, but
Oh
they
yeah.
knew immediately that it was shit. Yeah, and they called it out even though their friend was in it.
But yeah. But back to that episode with the paintball.
Great episode.
And yes, and like you said with Community, because they're playing up the realities of paintball, because when they're with I love the back and forth when they're with the accountant or whatever the guy,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
he's like, "This your first time out there, kid?" He's like, "I'm 36. Is this your first time out, old man?" He's like, "Yes, I love it. The thrill of war." And then he's like, "I'm gonna go get the flag," and like, "No, you fool, we're behind enemy lines." And he gets up and gets blasted, of course, and it's this big dramatic thing.
Mhm.
And then Dwayne and Dwayne and why am I not? Oh, Tim. Dwayne and Tim have their little standoff, and I keep thinking
Mike.
Ed because I just watched Shaun of the Dead. I'm sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mike. Mike comes in for the big save, and they get to have their big emotional moment of don't worry about me. And then it just cuts to me like, oh, this is a great day. I had a lot of fun today. Really got my aggressions out.
Yeah, second stupid moment that really affected me a lot. It's a death scene. He's spewing up yellow like paste and saying like
Yeah.
like talking, and he's dying, and it affects me emotionally, and I don't understand how they managed to do that, especially because I've seen the behind the scenes stuff where Nick Frost talks about how shit that day was and how cold it was, and he's like shaking from being cold and like got this disgusting stuff in his mouth, and they're running out of daylight and everything, and still it's such an amazing scene. And the paintball is so amazing because it's like kind of an everyday thing, but it's shot like it's the most important thing ever. Like a lot of stuff in this show, they take how people shoot an action movie and they shoot a comedy in it, or a heist movie and they shoot a comedy in it, and of course a war movie where they're all getting blasted and torn apart, but it's all color, which people have done since. But I can imagine like a lot of TV shows, if they're going paintballing, it's just, I mean, obviously, a lot of it's down to it being single camera, and they, think more about what they're going to edit and stuff rather than just banging some cameras in a set. But I can really imagine, like, just people walking in like a, not to keep harping on it, but like a Big Bang Theory type show. Can you imagine a paintball episode there and how extremely different it would be?
Yeah, it'd just be like a nice wide shot of a
Yeah.
few little people like getting behind cover, and maybe a couple shots. Then it'd just be some close-ups where they say jokes back and forth. Like that would pretty much be it. And like
Yeah.
you're saying, losing light. Like I always smile at that shot of Tim when it's clearly getting dark, and like you said, we've both made stuff before, so that exact situation where you're like,
Yeah.
fuck, we just got to get it. We're not going to be able to come back out. So I know it's dark. We'll just have to fix it the best we can. I mean, it still works, but yeah, I mean, making some of your own stuff, you could see it and you know what it was probably like on the day when they are like, fuck, we just got to get this. We need these lines real quick.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, this is kind of off topic, but just imagine shooting some of your first films in Sweden in December because we get like 1 hour of daylight and you don't realize how fast it gets dark. And then all of a sudden you're shooting a close up and someone's having to hold like a phone close to their face to give a little bit of light because we didn't bring any lights. And this is supposed to be our magnum opus. And what the hell? When am I getting my TV show? I'm supposed to be making a space by now. I'm just out here with a fucking cell phone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I mean, yeah, like every episode has something. Like even me saying that the disco one might be my least favorite, but that's just because like everything's my favorite here. So even that episode I still like a lot. And I'm just trying to see if there's any like weird little gags that I like. I mean, I love the gag in the first episode with the Scooby-Doo, like, who's your favorite character? Or, oh no, who are you?
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, oh, clearly I was. And then they, you know, glasses drop and the camera zooms out and they're wearing the, I can't think of fucking characters' names. I'm fucking dying over here. God damn it.
Well, they're saying that there were Daphne and the cool guy. They're saying there were the cool characters, and then it all zooms out, and we get to see that they look exactly like the not cool
Shaggy
characters.
and Thelma.
Scooby and or Scooby. I'm an idiot. Exactly, and that's something that's just presented comedy-wise in a visual way. And that thing I mentioned of like how to do visual comedy, that video essay, it's funny that it's like just becoming aware of it changes so much in your mind when you're watching other stuff. How much the different visual steps are like affecting the humor of what's happening because we're so used to not seeing it. And I even feel like that video essay from Every Frame a Painting kind of started a trend in its own, just like Edgar Wright may have been part of starting a trend. Like video essays weren't a thing until that video came out and got millions of views, and then now video essays are such a thing, which is interesting. Just deconstructing these parts of what Edgar Wright is doing is enough to spark so much interest and enthusiasm, and all of that is present to some degree here in Spaced.
Yeah, I agree. But it's in a weird way, like not like video essays in general, and I mean, I guess even to, if I'm going to bring up this point to an extent, our show, but like with Spaced, and you know, even going back to, I've brought up this point on my own show before, but even going back to like Kevin Smith or Spaced, with things with references like this, when either they're, you know, discussing Star Wars or they're you know, referencing The Shining or Star Trek or whatever, you know, all these different genre pop culture things.
Yeah.
Like it was always a joke. It was played up as a goof that this person knows so much about Star Wars and they're trying to apply it to a real world thing. And maybe it's kind of a point, but it's just funnier that they're doing it. Or even when Tim is breaking down Star Wars to chaos theory and like, you know, if that gunner had just shot the escape pod and then none of it would have happened. And then but nowadays it's real life, like with social media and with blogs and vlogs and stuff. It's always like the minutia of film and TV and pop culture, which, don't get me wrong, I love. I'm down with it, but we add this extra pedestal to it, and it has to somehow explain our problems or somehow be the solution to social issues and stuff like that. And I think that's the wrong path. I think it's fine. Are you talking
about when people tweet a picture of like Donald Trump and Voldemort and are like,
yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like that's like the most base point of it. But then there are like legit, like, you know, a news outlets breaking down, why Donald Trump is Voldemort or something.
Yeah.
And it's weird because I know I'm a hypocrite because I mean I do a bunch of shows where I break down and try to talk about stuff I love or even stuff I hate that has to do with pop culture and sci-fi and geek and whatever. I just get concerned with the amount of weight it's starting to have, because I think it should be fun to dive into the stuff you enjoy and kind of get a better meaning out of it. But I don't think it should be this be all end all for life's problems, I guess.
Sure. So, I mean, if we were talking about like the philosophy of Spaced and how you can apply that to your real life, you wouldn't be as interested as actually talking about the filmmaking techniques and the writing techniques, which is what we like
Yeah,
to
I mean,
do.
a little bit. I guess you could take something from it personally. I guess it's more about how people put so much weight into, like, I guess it mostly comes down to social issues, like people looking at, yeah, like whether it be politics or racism and prejudice. And, you know, I'm sure a lot of people these days would pick apart, you know, the space to have a white person problem, like, yeah, it's stuff like that. So I don't know. I guess I'm kind of rambling, but I'm always almost at the point that I want to make.
Yeah.
But it just feels like the scales have tipped too much, where it should be kind of a goof and something for fun. And I think personally, you could take away, like, a show like Spaced could help you in your own life, but it shouldn't be this, I don't know, it shouldn't be this huge thing where everyone has to make this fucking virtue signal point about. Not that Spaced would be one of them, but it's just one of those shows where in it, you know, in the beginning it was kind of a goof, and now things like this would be like, no, don't you understand? This has to do with the immigration.
Well, so you're saying we Spaced is better than Elysium, where the the plot is. Which, by the way, this didn't feel like hit over the head on me because I'm not in the same. On the same continent, so that's not as much in my head. But Elysium, you know, this, to summarize for everyone who missed Elysium, this sci-fi story about the rich people get all the health care and they're all white, I guess, and the poor people live on Earth and they're Spanish speaking. I guess that was basically the point. It was about immigration. Is that more or
Yeah,
less?
yeah, it was. And the biggest problem is how dumb it was, because you could do that actually, but you have to really work on it, and you have to be very intelligent. You don't have to have a scene where it's like, free the immigrants, yes or no, on the computer or whatever. I forget exactly what the wording was, but it did come down to him hitting Y on the keyboard to give healthcare to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I see where you're coming from, but I feel like a lot of it is just people executing stuff poorly.
I
as
think you're
far
right.
as like, because I'm sure there's some good reference you could do where you call Donald Trump something very specific that would be funny, but just saying this is like this is that's how you don't do references. That's how you just bring something up out of nowhere and say like, whoa, you're like Darth Vader, like we were saying at the start. And that's never been what Spaced would do. And usually, as you were saying, like, even if we respect characters who know too much about pop culture or whatever, we're kind of enjoying with them the absurdity of what they're saying rather than going into it completely and saying like, yeah, that's a good point, Tim, because Tim doesn't really make a lot of good points when he's talking about this stuff. It's just kind of fun and nice, and these are characters mostly bullshitting around.
Yeah,
So
you're
yeah.
right. And Tim doesn't really make good points kind of until the last episode.
Yeah, great point in the last episode, though.
Yeah, and I mean, there are a couple quick calls just in that episode. Like, I like the working of like the skateboard bales in with kind of the shots, like when like taking small shots at each other, and then of course there's the Tekken fight when they have the big argument. But yeah, there's one big point that he makes, and then there's also when Tim finally says life just isn't like the movies, and it's a great line, because this show, like the whole show's been about making life like the movies. You have a real moment, and then of course he has a great monologue about walking in on yourself, like basically the feeling, like that moment of clarity after you ejaculate, come, if you will. And you know, it's like then you realize, like, what am I doing? And then it was the same thing where he finds that out with trying to get back in with his ex that treated him badly, that he's been pining for. And I think him being a jerk was deliberate, because he was still pining for an ex that dumped him, and he, you know, was just being that fucking guy about it.
Yeah.
And he comes to that conclusion because he has these new friends in this new life, and it finally dawns on him that he doesn't need that girl anymore. Of course, that's when they all come coming back, isn't it? When you forget about them, that's when they come coming back, right, Jacob? That's when they come
right.
crawling back, right?
Yeah, they do come crawling back when you forget about them. That's actually true. But yeah, that is a great monologue, and it's kind of makes you realize that the episodes you just watched actually have like a point, because it's kind of like just fun adventures and this and that, and then at the end it's like, oh, life's like they're trying to make life like the movies, and the show shows this heart that we've been like feeling is there but not noticing, and telling us now we're getting into the philosophy of space, but like really telling us how to process these things of being at this point in your life and being lost and stuff like that, and it will make you emotional over silly things, even if they're not really important. Even if it is just yellow paint on your chest, you might still cry like it's not, because of how real they can make something feel. Yeah, because
Yeah,
we've all felt
absolutely.
that feeling of life's not like the movies. We teach ourselves how to be by watching TV and movies, and then life is not. I mean, and not in a bad way, but it's just not the same. And I don't know. That's why part of why it's an amazing show.
Agreed, agreed. And yeah, they have a great montage. I believe they also do a similar thing in series 2, kind of like a nice finishing montage. And it's always nice when a show could do that. Some shows try and fail. It's a thing, again, to bring up Scrubs. Scrubs used to do it pretty well as well. And you know, we get our montage of Tim and Daisy dancing, and we get to see where all our characters are at. Brian's finding love and maybe cheering up a little bit. Marsha's doesn't it when her daughter like puts the covers on her and takes the cigarette out, so it shows that there's some love there, there's a relationship. And then Twist is also finding love with Brian, and they went to like an art show where it's just when everything's blank, right?
Yeah,
It's
all these
white.
white paintings. I mean, they do take the Mickey, as it were, out of a lot of things, but mostly art gets the worst clobbering because they never show anything like positive about it. It's all pretentious nonsense, which is super fun. And yeah, it's just a gallery of white paintings, and they all have different names, and then they at the end they pick out a postcard, and she's like, "Oh my, you picked my favorite," and they're all just white paintings.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I mean, yeah, there's a nice hint for series 2, because I think Tim does say something about how Daisy always wanted to go to Asia, and I believe we kind of pick up right with that when we get into there. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I know we jumped around a lot. I think we talked a lot about what they were going for and the themes and such, and I think we nailed it, as we usually do.
As always, yeah.
But I'm really glad I rewatched it, because, like I said, it's just been too long, and it holds up so well, and it's such a well-made show. There's so much there between the filmmaking, the writing, the back and forth. It's a marvel, if you will. It's a marvel of a show.
Yeah. And speaking of rewatching it as we were doing, I used to rewatch stuff so much, because like even at the age when I was originally watching these UK shows, I would tape them and then rewatch them on VHS tapes, and I like had so many of them. And then I don't know why, but like recently I just haven't been rewatching a lot of stuff at all, because a lot of times when you rewatch something, it's not the same. Like you get emotional, but it's only because of nostalgia and remembering and associating and stuff like that. But here, when you go back, it's like you can actually learn stuff from this show. I mean, mostly about filmmaking, also about obviously the life's not like movies and all like that, but just the way it holds up, the way it stacks up against modern TV. It's still better than like just how it's put together is so much better than most TV we see now, even though we're in the golden age of television, and they did this in the fucking bronze age of television, and they still nailed it. So go watch Spaced, everyone. It's a fun ride.
Yeah, and they have all those fun, Tim and Mike keep looking up to their past, to like their memory, and then with Brian and Marsha, and it's fun because they're always kind of referencing it, and there's no big revelation there, but it's still fun the way it's, kind of hinted at. Then in the final episode, it's like, oh yeah, Marsha and Brian had sex, and Tim caused Mike to jump out of a jump out of a tree and detach his retinas. Is that what it was?
Yeah, I really think, I mean, that is mostly a joke about like hinting at stuff, I guess, because they keep
Yeah.
looking up, and then it just pans up with this sentimental music, bing, 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 but it always gets interrupted. We never find out what happened, the dark secret in the past, and it's like that he made him jump out of a tree. That's the whole thing, and that kind of ties together with Life is Not Like the Movies, I feel.
Yeah, and it's nice that it comes to head in the last episode where things, just become, I mean, not really mundane, but just not some big revelation. Not some big revelation is going to wrap up everything and explain it all away.
Yeah. Yeah, great show. I mean, this has been an example of what you're going to get if you go to iTunes and leave a review for Shows What You Know. Just search for Shows What You Know and leave a review. Tell us what to watch. I'm still into watching those other ones that we were just talking about, but I believe coming up next we're going to have some discussions on Preacher. What else do we have in the pipeline? Is that it?
Preacher for sure, but we had a lot of stuff we've been throwing around, but nothing really cemented. Because Preacher, I think, still won't be for another 2 weeks.
That's true. Well,
Or
this
is
is a
it-
great.
I don't know. Sorry, let me cut you off.
Who knows? But that means this is the great time to get your suggestions in. We are, of course, keeping an eye on the new TV shows coming out, and we're going to get you updated on those as soon as we've sunk our teeth into it. Maybe even have a look at The Tick that we mentioned, and some other stuff that's in the pipes, in the internet pipes of television. But it's hard. It's gonna. I don't know. It's just great to talk about these shows that have so much to unpack, because often it's like, that was fun and that was bad and that was fun, and then you're done. And here it's like we could still do an episode on season 2 of Spaced, and I'd feel we'd have no problem filling it with just as much like semi-pretentious talk about how it was put together. It's fun.
Absolutely. So, I guess that's that. Any other finishing thoughts on Spaced? Final thoughts?
No, it's. I guess we did a lot of good thoughts already. It's a film. It feels like watching a film. Okay. 2 small thoughts. Simon Pegg looks exactly the same, and he always has and always shall. Nick Frost looks so different in this. He looks like
he
down.
does. I didn't even think about that, but he does. He does look pretty different.
Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
No, I just had a quick question. The show also has this weirdly dark tint, and I don't mean emotionally. I mean just in the way it's lit, or maybe the saturation, or maybe it's just that I'm not used to seeing a sitcom where the saturation isn't like huge, because it's kind of gray-ish and kind of washed out, and I don't know how much of that is like a product of being made in that time with that technology, and how much of it is like intentional, let's make it feel realistic, because it kind of adds to this semi-depressive feel that it has sometimes when they're just hanging out and being bored, and it's like not vibrancy coming at you. The filmmaking side of it has, but just the look of the colors and like the exposure, because it's obviously more low-key lighting than we'd ever see in a regular sitcom.
Yes, absolutely. Because even in comparison to something like you mentioned, Community was always like bright, like popping like in your face, except maybe now when some of the more action ones, they might have upped the saturation, but for the most part it was still very sitcom-y looking for the most most of the episodes. And I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, some of it's just older and I guess standard definition, and a lot of it is probably on purpose just to get a particular mood and feel.
Yeah, I guess so. Part of me would want to see like an HD version or remaster or something, but part of me is also like, it's pure, leave it pure and true, and like watch it on VHS tapes to get the right feeling. So, yeah.
Well, did you ever watch that documentary that has the quick like revisit to Tim and Daisy?
Yeah, although we did say no spoilers. So.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to know if you've seen it. It's a thing. All right.
I've seen it. That's the whole reason they don't need to do a season 3.
Of course. Yeah.
And they've brought it up a lot of times, like, because over the years, and then eventually they've just had to say, "Stop asking. We're like 50 now." They're not 50, but kind of
Yeah.
like we're not in that mind space anymore. And that's what I was reading in their last state, or Simon Pegg's last statement on it. It wouldn't be true anymore to go back and try to make something like that, because that's really captured a very specific time in their lives in that writing, and they're completely different people now. So it would feel very weird and fake if they went and redid it, or if someone else redid it for the US, for example, which never happened and shall never be mentioned.
Should we watch these clips here from the American Spaced?
I don't know. I don't think so.
It would
I was
just be us
just saying
shitting
it
on
didn't happen.
it would just be
Uh,
us shitting on something, right?
yeah. Also, do we have the technology to do that sort of thing?
I might be able to pull it up.
Hmm. I don't know. Seems risky, Jim.
Yeah, okay. I don't know if I've watched these or not, because I know there are some clips on YouTube of the American remake, and that was a big controversy, because I think originally they tried to make it seem like the original people were involved or on board or signed off on it or something. Because I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
Simon Pegg
exactly.
had to come out and say, like, no, they didn't really talk to us or anything. It was just Mick G, I believe, the
Hmm.
director of Charlie's Angels, and Charlie's Angels Full Throttle produced it.
Yes, and talking
Although to
about
be
how,
fair,
yeah, go
but
ahead.
I was just gonna say, to be fair, McGee, I believe, also produced Supernatural.
Oh, cool. I think no one should ever watch those clips. I guess that answers it. I mean, maybe for the bonus section, I'm just gonna finish up by saying that hey, the review we already mentioned. If you want more from Jim, his insight into references and how they should be stricken from Twitter and all other social media, you can check out jimandthem.com or search for Jim and Them on iTunes or your favorite podcatching software. Of course, for me, there's always awesomepedia.org and my YouTube Awesomepedia, which is going to very shortly have a pretty long video that I recorded the other day all about fixing Game of Thrones, bringing up
Ooh.
a lot of the ideas we've talked about in our Game of Thrones episodes, and basically pitching a different season 7 where things aren't drastically different, but they're just different enough where I feel like it works a bit better. So please do go to Awesomepedia on YouTube and subscribe to get that in your inbox very soon.
Yes, thanks.
Later.